The video was 10 seconds long. No sound at first, just my mother's hand tightening around a glass, my father leaning in, both of them smiling at someone off camera. It looked ordinary, almost forgettable, until the camera shifted, until the uniform came into frame, until my father said the one sentence he swore he never said. I watched it 3 times before I understood what I was looking at. By then, the invitations had already been returned. The calls had already stopped. They said they were protecting the family. They said I was making a mistake. What they didn't know was that I had already seen everything. I learned early that silence was safer than explanation. In our house, nothing was ever said directly. Approval came in small, controlled gestures, an extra cup of tea placed beside my notebook, a brief nod across the dinner table, a question asked without eye contact. Disapproval, on the other hand, was quieter. It showed up in pauses that lasted too long, in conversations that shifted when I entered the room, in the way my mother would adjust something on the table just to avoid looking at me. We did not argue. We did not raise our voices. We maintained. My father believed in structure, not just routines, but outcomes. Everything had a purpose: education, relationships, even small decisions like where we sat during family gatherings. He did not say these things openly. He did not need to. His expectations were understood in the way everyone else adjusted themselves around him. My mother managed the rest: appearances, conversations, impressions. She remembered who needed to be called, what needed to be said, and how every detail reflected back on us. I watched her build entire narratives out of small moments, carefully choosing what to share and what to leave out. It always looked effortless, but I knew it was. I learned from both of them. I kept my voice steady. I chose my words carefully. I did not ask for more than what was offered. It worked. For years, it worked. People described me the same way every time: quiet, reliable, easy to manage. My parents never corrected them. They let those descriptions settle as if they were accurate enough, and I never challenged it. By the time I met him, I had already built a life that fit neatly within those expectations. It was not a dramatic meeting. There was no moment that stood out as important. He was there doing his job, standing near the entrance like he always did, watchful but not intrusive. Most people did not notice him. Or if they did, it was only for a second, the way people notice doors or cameras or anything designed to blend into the background. I noticed him because he did not look away. Not in a confrontational way. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable. Just steady, present, as if he was actually seeing what was in front of him instead of looking past it. The first time we spoke, it was about something small. Directions, I think, or access to a restricted area. I do not remember the exact words. What I remember is how simple it felt. No adjustment, no calculation. He answered directly. I responded the same way. There was no performance in it. After that, the interactions stayed small. Brief acknowledgments. Occasional conversations that never lasted long enough to draw attention. It was enough. I did not tell my parents about him. Not at first. It was not secrecy. It was timing. In our family, introductions were not casual. They carried weight, meaning, implication. You did not bring someone into that space unless you were certain of how they would be received. And I was not certain. Not because of him, because of them. He was consistent in a way I was not used to. Not expressive, not overly warm, but grounded. When he said something, it did not change later. When he listened, he did not interrupt. There were no layered meanings behind his words, no hidden expectations I needed to decode. I found myself staying longer than necessary just to extend conversations that were never complicated to begin with. Over time, the distance between those moments shortened. It became routine. And routines in my family were how things became real. When I finally told my parents about him, I chose the timing carefully. After dinner. Not too early, not too late. My mother was clearing the table. My father was reviewing something on his phone. I did not sit down. "I've been seeing someone," I said. My mother paused just for a second, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I did. My father looked up, his expression unchanged. There was no immediate reaction, no questions. That was normal. "Who is he?" my father asked eventually. The question was neutral, controlled. It did not invite details, but it allowed for them. "He works in security," I said. I watched the information settle. Not rejection, not acceptance, just placement, as if they were filing it somewhere, deciding where it belonged. My mother resumed clearing the table. My father nodded once. "How long?" he asked. "A few months." Another pause, shorter this time. "Bring him for dinner," my mother said, her tone even. "We should meet him." It sounded like approval. It felt like a test. I nodded. "Of course." And for a while, I believed that was enough. The dinner was never scheduled. At first, it felt like a simple delay. My mother mentioned needing to check dates. My father said the next few weeks were unusually busy. Neither of them refused. They just adjusted the timeline. I accepted that. In our house, delays were not unusual. Plans shifted often, especially when they involved extended family or formal introductions. Everything had to be arranged carefully, presented correctly. I told him it would take time. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "It's fine," he said. "Whenever they're ready." He did not ask for details. He did not ask why. That made it easier to wait. The first few days passed without anything noticeable. Conversations at home stayed the same, measured, polite, controlled. My mother still asked about my work. My father still commented on routine things, never lingering too long on any one topic. But there were small changes, subtle enough to dismiss. When my phone lit up during dinner, my mother's eyes would shift toward it for a second longer than before. She never asked who it was. She didn't need to. The awareness was enough. My father stopped using his phone at the table altogether. It wasn't a rule. He never said anything about it, but I noticed the difference. One evening, my mother asked, "What does he plan to do long term?" The question was casual, almost gentle. "He's already working," I said. "He's stable." "That's not what I asked," she replied, still focused on arranging something on her plate. "What are his plans?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "He's studying part-time," I said. "He wants to move into a supervisory role." It was the truth, a simple, straightforward progression. My mother nodded, but there was something in the way she did it, too quick, too light. "As long as there's direction," she said. My father did not respond. He continued eating, his expression unchanged. The conversation moved on. It always did. A few days later, I brought up the dinner again, not directly, just a small reminder. "You mentioned meeting him," I said. My mother smiled faintly. "Yes, of course, we'll plan something soon." Soon, it became the answer to everything. Soon turned into the following week. Then the week after that. Each time I mentioned it, there was a reason. A gathering that needed attention. A relative visiting unexpectedly. A schedule that didn't align. None of the reasons were unreasonable. That was what made them difficult to question. At the same time, other things began to shift. My mother started mentioning people I had not heard about in a while, distant relatives, family friends, conversations about their children, where they were working, who they were engaged to, what their families were like. The details were specific, carefully chosen. "This one just got promoted," she would say. "Very respectable position." Or, "Their family is well known." Good background. She never connected those comments to me directly. She didn't need to. My father, on the other hand, became quieter, not distant, just more selective. When I spoke about my day, he listened, but his responses were shorter. When I mentioned anything related to my relationship, even in passing, he acknowledged it with a nod and nothing more. There were no questions. That was new. One evening, I mentioned his name without thinking. Just a small reference in the middle of a sentence. My father paused. Not long, just enough to notice. Then he continued as if nothing had changed, but something had. I felt it in the way the room settled afterward. The silence stayed longer than usual. A few days later, I noticed something else. My mother had started taking calls in another room. She had always been open about conversations before answering calls at the table, discussing things openly, sometimes even putting people on speaker. It was part of how she managed everything. Now she would excuse herself. "It's just a quick call," she would say, already standing. The calls were never quick. When she returned, she did not mention them. I did not ask. It was easier not to. The first time I felt something close to unease, it came without a clear reason. Nothing had happened, not really. No arguments, no direct disapproval, no visible conflict. Just absence. Absence of curiosity. Absence of engagement. Absence of the kind of attention they usually gave to anything that mattered. I tried to explain it to myself in practical terms. They needed time. They were being careful. They wanted to understand before reacting. All of those explanations made sense, so I held on to them, and I waited. Because waiting in our family was how you showed respect, and I still believed that respect would be returned. The first clear inconsistency did not come from them. It came from someone who was not supposed to know anything at all. I was at a small family gathering, nothing formal, just a routine visit that my mother insisted we attend. These gatherings followed a predictable pattern. Conversations about work, health, distant relatives. Small updates repeated in different forms, depending on who was listening. I stayed where I usually did, close enough to be present, far enough to avoid attention. At some point, one of my cousins sat beside me. She was younger, less careful with her words. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing something casual. "So," she said, "I heard you're getting married." I nodded once. "Yes," she smiled, but there was confusion in it. "That's strange," she said. "No one mentioned it here." I didn't respond immediately. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She shrugged. "Usually things like this come up, especially your family. They always tell everyone everything." That was true. My mother believed in controlled narratives, but she also believed in visibility. Important events were shared early, shaped carefully, and repeated often enough that no one questioned them. A wedding was not something she would ignore. "It's still early," I said. "We haven't finalized everything." My cousin nodded, accepting the explanation easily. For her, it was enough. For me, it was. I carried that moment home with me. I did not mention it immediately. I waited until the next evening, choosing a time when both of my parents were present but not occupied. "I spoke to them yesterday," I said, referring to the gathering. "They didn't seem to know about the wedding." My mother looked up, her expression neutral. "It hasn't been announced yet," she said. The answer came too quickly. "Why not?" I asked. "We're still considering how to present it," she replied, as if the question itself was unnecessary. "These things need to be handled properly." My father remained silent. I watched him, but he did not look up. That was the first moment the explanation felt incomplete. Not wrong, just insufficient. Days passed, and I began to notice patterns I had ignored before. My messages to extended family members were answered with polite distance. Not avoidance, not rejection, just a kind of neutrality that felt unfamiliar. Conversations ended sooner than expected. Questions were not followed by interest. No one asked for details. No one asked about him. At first, I thought it was coincidence, timing, disinterest. But the consistency of it made that explanation harder to maintain. Then there were the invitations. I had drafted them carefully, keeping everything simple. Names, date, location, nothing elaborate. I showed them to my mother before sending them out. She reviewed them without comment, her expression unchanged. "They're fine," she said. so I sent them. A few days later, I noticed something small. One of the invitations I had handed to a close family friend was still on the table near the entrance. It hadn't been moved. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. "Did they come by?" I asked. My mother glanced at it briefly. "No," she said. "They'll collect it later." Her tone was casual. I placed the invitation back where it was. Later that evening, I checked again. It was gone. I did not ask what had happened to it. The next day, I received a message, a simple apology. They would not be able to attend. No reason given. It was earlier than expected, too early. I thanked them and left it at that. Over the next week, more responses came in. Some polite, some vague, some delayed. A few did not respond at all. I kept track of them without writing anything down. Names, patterns, timing. There was something structured in the way the responses arrived. Not coordinated in an obvious way, but aligned enough to feel intentional. I began to notice something else. My mother had started asking more specific questions. Not about him directly, but about details that surrounded him. "Where exactly does he work?" she asked one evening. I told her. "Who does he report to?" I answered. "What are his hours like?" I explained. Each question was precise, focused, not curious, evaluative. My father listened, but he still did not ask anything himself. He just absorbed the information. That was when the first real doubt formed. Not about him, about them. It was quiet at first, just a shift in how I interpreted things. I stopped assuming that delays were harmless. I stopped believing that silence meant neutrality. I started paying attention to what was not being said. And the more I observed, the more the absence of clarity began to feel like something deliberate. Still, I did not confront them. Not yet, because I did not have proof. Only patterns. And patterns in our family were never acknowledged unless they became impossible to ignore. So I waited, and I watched more carefully than before. I chose my words carefully the first time I asked directly, not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I understood how easily a question could be turned into something else. It was late evening. My mother was in the living room, reviewing a list of something I could not see. My father was nearby, reading, or at least appearing to. The room was quiet in the way it always was before something shifted. "I've noticed something," I said. My mother didn't look up. "What is it?" "People aren't responding the way I expected," I continued. "About the wedding." That made her pause, not for long, just enough to acknowledge that she had heard me. "They're busy," she said. "Everyone has their own commitments." "That's not what I meant." Now she looked at me. Her expression wasn't defensive. It was measured, controlled. "Then what do you mean?" she asked. I held her gaze for a second before answering. "It feels like they already know something I don't." The words settled between us. My father turned a page in his book. My mother leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that felt less like listening and more like assessment. "You're overthinking," she said. The response was immediate, clean, final. "I don't think I am." She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "You've always been sensitive to changes," she said. "You notice things and attach meaning to them. That doesn't mean the meaning isn't there." "It often isn't," she replied, her tone still calm. "Not everything is intentional." I let the silence stretch for a moment. "I spoke to them," I said. "They didn't know about the wedding." My mother's expression didn't change. "We haven't formally told everyone yet," she repeated. "I explained that already. That's not how it usually works." Now the smile faded. "This situation is different," she said. "How?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted the papers in her hand, aligning their edges with unnecessary precision. "Because it requires more consideration," she said finally. "Consideration of what?" My father closed his book. The sound was soft, but it carried. "That's enough," he said. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. "I'm just asking for clarity," I said. "And you've been given it," my mother replied. "You're choosing not to accept it." I felt the shift then, not in volume, not in tone, in position. The conversation was no longer about understanding. It had become about control. "I'm not refusing anything," I said. "I'm trying to understand why things feel inconsistent." My mother shook her head slightly. "They only feel inconsistent because you're focusing on them too much," she said. "If you stepped back, you'd see that everything is moving at a normal pace. It doesn't feel normal. That doesn't make it abnormal." The words were precise, carefully constructed. I had heard variations of them before in different situations. They always led to the same place: doubt, not about them, about myself. My father stood up, placing his book on the table. "You're letting this distract you," he said, "from more important decisions." "What decisions?" He looked at me directly now. "The kind that affect your future," he said, "not just your present feelings." I understood what he was implying. "This is about him," I said. "It's about everything," my mother replied quickly. "Don't reduce it to one person. You're not even saying his name." That was the first time the conversation broke its pattern, just slightly. My mother's expression tightened. "Names are not the issue," she said. "Then what is?" "Your judgment." The word stayed in the air longer than anything else she had said. I didn't respond immediately. "Explain that," I said. "You're making a decision that will define your life," she continued. "And you're doing it based on limited perspective." "He's not a limited perspective." "You've known him for how long?" she asked. "That doesn't change who he is." "It changes how much you actually know." My father stepped in before I could respond. "You're defending something you haven't fully evaluated," he said. "That's not like you." I recognized the shift again. They weren't attacking him directly. They were reframing me, making the issue about my perception, my judgment, my understanding. If I continued, I would be arguing against my own credibility. I let the silence return. My mother exhaled softly as if the tension had passed. "We're not against you," she said. "We're trying to protect you." From what? The question stayed in my mind, but I didn't ask it out loud, because I already knew the answer they would give, and I knew it would not be the truth. "Just trust us," she added. I nodded, not because I agreed, because I understood something I hadn't fully accepted before. This was not confusion, it was positioning. And for the first time, I realized that whatever was happening, they had already decided their side of it. They were just waiting for me to accept it, or to stop asking. I did neither. I just stopped speaking. And I started listening more carefully than ever before. The first piece of truth did not arrive clearly. It came in fragments, small, incomplete, easy to dismiss on their own. I started noticing them once I stopped expecting direct answers. It was a conversation I was not meant to hear. My mother was on the phone in the next room. The door was not fully closed, just enough to suggest privacy without enforcing it. I was passing by when I heard my name. I did not stop immediately. That would have been obvious. I slowed down instead, just enough for the words to reach me without changing my pace. "She doesn't understand how these things look," my mother was saying. There was a pause. "No, we haven't told everyone yet. We're being careful." Another pause. "I know, that's exactly the issue." Her voice was lower than usual, but not tense, controlled as always. "I've already spoken to a few people. It's better if they hear it from us first." I kept walking. I did not wait for the rest. It was enough. Later that evening, she acted as if nothing had happened. She asked me about my day, commented on something small, maintained the same calm tone she always used. I responded the same way. Neither of us acknowledged what I had heard. That became the pattern, small exposures. No confrontation. A few days later, I experienced something similar. This time, it was not my mother, it was someone else. I had gone to meet him after work. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes at the end of a long day when most people have already left. He was at his usual place near the entrance, standing in that same steady way that had first caught my attention. We spoke briefly, nothing unusual. Then someone else approached. Another employee, older, familiar with him. They greeted each other, exchanged a few words. I stepped aside, not wanting to interrupt. That was when I heard it. "Your situation," the man said quietly. "I heard something about it." I looked up, but neither of them noticed. He didn't respond immediately. "What did you hear?" he asked, his tone even. The man hesitated. "Just that there might be complications," he said. "From her side." Her side. There was no confusion about who he meant. "People talk," he added quickly. "It may not be accurate." There was a pause. "I see," he said. No reaction, no visible change, just acknowledgement. The conversation shifted after that, moving to something else. Routine, work-related, but the damage was already done, not in what was said, in what it confirmed. Something was being communicated, quietly, indirectly, and it was not coming from me. When we left, I did not mention it immediately. We walked in silence for a few moments. Then I said, "Someone spoke to you." He nodded. "Yes." "What did they say?" He looked ahead, not at me. "That there might be issues," he replied. He did not elaborate. I waited, but he did not continue. "Do you think it's coming from them?" I asked. It was the first time I had said it out loud. He considered the question for a moment. "I don't assume," he said, "but it doesn't feel random." That was as close as he came to agreement. It was enough. The next piece came unexpectedly. A message, not from someone close but not distant either. A family acquaintance who rarely contacted me directly. It was brief. "I heard things might be uncertain. I hope everything works out." No details, no explanation, just implication. I read it twice. Then I set my phone down. There was no reason to respond immediately. Instead, I went back to the invitation list. Names, responses, timing. I started to see the structure more clearly. People who had been contacted early. People who had withdrawn quietly. People who were waiting. It wasn't random. It was guided. The final piece came in the form of the video. I didn't find it. It was shown to me, not directly, not intentionally. A friend had it open on their phone, scrolling through something unrelated. It appeared for a second, just long enough for me to recognize the setting. My parents' living room. I reached for the phone without thinking. "Wait," I said. They handed it to me, confused. "It's nothing," they said. "Just a clip from last week." I didn't respond. I pressed play. There was no sound at first, just movement, familiar furniture, familiar angles. Then the audio came in. Voices, my mother's, my father's, clear, unfiltered. They were speaking to someone off camera, relaxed, unguarded. "He doesn't understand the position this puts us in," my father was saying. My mother laughed softly. "She'll realize eventually," she said. "Or she'll have to." The camera shifted slightly. A uniform came into view. Not his, someone else's, another security employee. They were discussing him, not directly, not by name, but clearly. "He's not suitable," my father continued. "This isn't about emotion, it's about reality." I felt something settle in my chest, not shock, recognition. The clip ended. 10 seconds, that was all it took. I handed the phone back without saying anything. "Do you want me to send it to you?" my friend asked. I shook my head. "No." Because I already understood what it meant. I didn't need to keep it. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was just waiting for me to decide what to do with it. And for the first time, I stopped wondering if I was misinterpreting things. I was. I had been listening carefully. And now everything was starting to align. They chose a formal way to say it. Not a conversation, not a discussion. A statement. It came in the form of a message first, sent in the family group where updates were usually neutral. Birthdays, travel plans, routine announcements that required acknowledgement but not response. This one was different. My father wrote it. "We regret to inform that we will not be attending the upcoming wedding. This decision has been made after careful consideration of long-term implications. We ask that everyone respect our position and refrain from further discussion." There were no names. No direct references, but it was clear. I read it once, then again. The wording was deliberate, structured in a way that made it sound final, reasonable, even responsible. There was no room for questions. That was the intention. Responses began appearing underneath, short messages, polite, supportive. We understand. Of course. Family decisions are never easy. Each one reinforced the same narrative, that this was difficult but necessary, that they were acting out of concern. No one asked what the concern was. No one needed to. The framing had already been established. I did not respond. There was nothing I could say in that space that would not be absorbed into their version of events. Instead, I put my phone down and continued with what I was doing. Outwardly, nothing changed. Internally, something had shifted completely. Later that evening, my mother approached me, not immediately after the message. She waited, as if giving me time to process or perhaps time to accept. "We thought it was better to make it clear," she said. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. I looked at her. "You didn't speak to me first." "We've already spoken," she replied. "Many times." "That wasn't a conversation," I said. "That was positioning." She held my gaze, her expression steady. "This is not about positioning," she said. "It's about responsibility." "To who?" "To the family." The word landed heavily. I nodded once. "I see." My father joined us then, standing slightly behind her. "We're not asking for your agreement," he said. "Only your understanding." "I understand," I replied. That was the first true statement I had made in a long time, because I did understand, just not in the way they expected. Over the next few days, the effects of their message became visible, not dramatic, not immediate, but consistent. People who had not responded to invitations began sending formal declines. Those who had been uncertain became certain. A few reached out privately, their messages careful and indirect. "I hope everything is okay. I'm sure this will work out in the best way." No one asked what had happened. They already believed they knew. The narrative had settled. At the same time, something else was happening, quietly. The video, it hadn't been shared publicly, not widely, but it was moving, slowly, selectively. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. People who had seen it began to respond differently, not openly. Not in a way that could be traced, but the tone shifted. Conversations that had felt distant became more measured, less certain, as if something didn't align anymore. I noticed it in small ways, a message that lingered longer than expected, a question that almost formed then didn't, a pause where there hadn't been one before. It was subtle, but it was there. At home, nothing changed on the surface. My parents continued as they always had, routine, structure, control. But the distance between us became more defined, not through conflict, through absence. We spoke less, not intentionally. There was just less to say. One evening, my mother mentioned the wedding again, not directly. "We've informed everyone," she said. "It's better this way. There won't be confusion." I nodded. "There isn't any confusion," I replied. She looked at me, trying to read something in my expression. "You're taking this calmly," she said. "I've learned from you," I answered. She didn't respond. My father watched the exchange without intervening. For the first time, I saw something in his expression that I couldn't immediately define. Not doubt, not regret, something closer to awareness. As if he was starting to recognize that the situation was not unfolding entirely within his control. But he said nothing. And I did not ask. Outside of the house, things were different. He remained the same, steady, present, unchanged. We continued planning, not with excitement, with precision. Every detail was handled quietly, efficiently. No unnecessary discussions, no emotional weight placed on decisions, just movement. One night I showed him the final venue confirmation. "It's done," I said. He looked at it, then back at me. "Are you sure?" he asked. It wasn't doubt, it was consideration. "Yes," I said. He nodded. "Then we proceed." No hesitation, no conditions. That was the difference. There was no attempt to control the outcome, only to support it. As the days passed, the gap between the two worlds I was moving through became impossible to ignore. On one side, a system built on perception, influence, and carefully managed narratives. On the other, something quieter, less visible, but more consistent. I didn't try to reconcile them anymore. I didn't look for a way to make them align, because I had already seen what happened when they didn't. The final escalation came without warning. Another message. This time, not in the group. Directly to me, from my father. If you proceed with this, understand that the consequences will extend beyond the event itself. I read it once. Then I set my phone down. There was no anger, no immediate reaction, just a clear recognition of what it was, not a warning, a confirmation, that everything they had been doing was intentional. I didn't reply, because there was nothing left to clarify, only something left to accept, and I already had. I did not watch the video again immediately, not because I was avoiding it, because I didn't need to. The words were already clear in my mind, precise, unchanged, impossible to reinterpret. My father's tone, my mother's quiet agreement, the way both of them spoke when they believed there would be no consequences for what they were saying. That was what stayed with me, not the content alone, the absence of restraint. For days, I moved through everything as if nothing had shifted, but internally, something had settled into place. There was no more uncertainty, no more need to question whether I was misreading anything. The doubt they had carefully placed, over time, through tone, through language, through repetition, had stopped working. Not because I rejected it, because I had seen what existed without it. I chose a moment when the house was quiet, not late enough to suggest secrecy, not early enough to invite interruption. My mother was in the same room she always used for calls. My father was at the table, reviewing something on paper. I stood there for a second before speaking. "I saw it," I said. Neither of them asked what I meant. That told me everything. My mother looked at me first. Her expression did not change. My father remained still. "The video," I added. The words settled in the room. There was no immediate denial, no confusion, just silence. Then my mother spoke. "You shouldn't rely on isolated moments to form conclusions," she said. The response was immediate, prepared. "It wasn't isolated," I replied. "It was 10 seconds," she said. "That was enough." My father finally looked up. "You're taking something out of context," he said. "What context makes it different?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "Conversations like that are not meant to be interpreted without full understanding," he said. "I understood it. You think you did." The distinction was deliberate. I felt the familiar structure of the conversation forming again, reframing, redirecting, positioning, but something was different this time. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't asking them to admit anything. I was only observing. "You said he wasn't suitable," I said. My mother exhaled softly. "We were discussing concerns," she replied. "You said I would have to realize it eventually. That was about your future. It was about control." Her expression tightened just slightly. "You're simplifying something that is more complex," she said. "I'm removing everything that isn't true." The room went quiet again. My father stood up slowly, placing his papers aside. "This is not productive," he said. "It doesn't need to be," I replied. He looked at me directly. "For you, maybe," he said. "But for us, it matters how this is handled." That was the first time he acknowledged the difference. Not in facts, in priorities. "I'm not handling anything," I said. "I'm accepting it." My mother watched me carefully. "Accepting what?" she asked. "That you already made your decision," I said, "before you spoke to me." Neither of them responded because there was nothing to correct. I continued. "You didn't need my agreement," I said. "You needed my silence." "That's not true," my mother said quickly. "It is," I replied, "and I gave it to you." That was the moment something shifted, not in them, in me. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for their response. I wasn't measuring my words against their reactions. I wasn't adjusting. I was simply stating what was already clear. You spoke to people before I did, I said. You shaped what they would think before they had a chance to ask me. That's called responsibility, my father said. No, I replied. That's called control. He held my gaze, but he didn't argue further, because the structure of the conversation no longer supported it. There was no uncertainty left to work with, no doubt to introduce, only acknowledgement, and they weren't willing to give it. My mother tried once more. You're letting this define everything, she said. A single moment? It wasn't a single moment, I interrupted quietly. It was confirmation of everything that had come before, of every delay, every unanswered question, every controlled response. I took a breath. I'm not asking you to change anything, I said. You've made your position clear. And you've made yours, my father replied. Yes. The word felt heavier than anything else I had said, not because it was defiant, because it was final. There was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to clarify, only the outcome. My mother looked at me for a long moment. You're choosing this, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I am. She looked away first. My father didn't. If you continue, he said, you understand what that means. I thought about his message, the consequences, the extension beyond the event itself. I do, I said, and I did, not in the way they intended, not as a warning, but as a cost, a measurable, defined cost. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to reduce it. I was accepting it fully. There was no anger in that acceptance. No need to argue or defend, just clarity. I turned to leave. No one stopped me. No one called after me. The conversation ended the same way everything else had in that house. Quietly. But this time, the silence meant something different. It wasn't restraint. It wasn't control. It was separation. And I understood that there was no version of this where both sides remained unchanged. One of them already had. The other was just beginning to. The shift did not happen all at once. There was no moment where everything reversed, no single event that forced acknowledgement. It unfolded the same way everything else had, quietly. The first change was in the messages. Not the public ones. Those remained consistent, polite, aligned, carefully worded to support the position my parents had already established. The change happened in private. A relative who had declined earlier sent a second message. I may have misunderstood some things. No explanation, no direct reference, just a small adjustment in tone. I read it once and set it aside. Another message came the next day. I didn't realize the situation fully. I hope you're doing well. Again, nothing specific. But the certainty that had been there before was gone. It was being replaced by hesitation. And hesitation in our family meant something had shifted. I didn't respond immediately to any of them. There was no urgency, no need to correct or explain, because the correction was already happening, not through me, through what they had seen. The video, it hadn't been shared openly. No one mentioned it directly, but it moved in the same way my parents' version of events had moved. Quietly. Intentionally. Only this time it wasn't controlled. That was the difference. A narrative can be shaped. Evidence cannot. It doesn't argue. It doesn't defend itself. It just exists. And once it does, people begin to compare. What they were told. What they observed. What no longer aligns. I started noticing it in conversations that didn't include me. A call I walked into mid-sentence. A discussion that stopped when I entered the room, not out of avoidance, but out of uncertainty. People were recalculating. Not publicly, never publicly, but internally. And in a system built on perception, that was enough. At home, the change was more contained. My parents did not address anything directly. They didn't mention the video. They didn't reference the shift in responses, but they noticed it. I could see it in the way my mother adjusted her tone when speaking to certain people on the phone. More careful now, less assured, as if she was no longer certain of what the other person knew. My father became even more reserved. If before he had been selective, now he was almost silent, not withdrawn, just contained, as if speaking carried a risk it hadn't before. One evening, I overheard part of a conversation, not intentionally, just enough to understand. "We didn't say it like that," my mother was explaining, a pause. "That's not the full context." Another pause. "No, of course we support her, that's not the issue." I didn't stay to hear the rest. I didn't need to. The language had changed. From certainty to clarification, from control to defense, it was subtle, but it was there. I didn't confront them about it. There was nothing to gain from doing that. No outcome that would change what had already been established. Instead, I focused on what was still within my control. The wedding. The details were finalized without interference. No last-minute complications. No external pressure. Just a steady progression toward a fixed point. People who had declined did not reverse their decisions publicly, but some of them appeared anyway, quietly, without announcement. They did not explain why. I did not ask. Their presence was enough. On the day itself, everything moved as planned. There were no disruptions, no unexpected scenes, just absence. The kind that doesn't need to be pointed out because everyone already knows it's there. My parents were not there. No message, no acknowledgement, nothing. And yet their presence was still felt. In the way people looked around briefly as if expecting them. In the conversations that avoided certain topics. In the careful balance of what was said and what was left unsaid. But something else was present too. Not louder, not stronger, just clearer. The difference between what had been claimed and what had been shown. Afterward, the responses continued. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, just small adjustments. People who had aligned themselves earlier began to step back from those positions. Not openly, but noticeably. The narrative my parents had built did not collapse. It didn't need to, it simply stopped holding. And once that happens, it doesn't recover. At home, nothing was discussed. Days passed without reference to the wedding. No questions, no reflections, just the same routines. But the structure had changed. The control they once held over how things were perceived was no longer complete. Not broken, just limited, and they knew it. I could see it in the way they avoided certain topics, in the way conversations ended sooner than before, in the silence that now carried something heavier than restraint. It carried awareness. And awareness, once introduced, does not disappear, even when no one speaks about it, especially then. After the wedding, nothing asked to be resolved. There were no messages waiting for explanation, no delayed confrontations, no attempt to revisit what had already unfolded. The silence remained, but it had changed. Before, it had been structured, maintained, used to keep things in place. Now it felt settled, not peaceful, just final. I moved through the days the same way I always had, measured, quiet, aware of what was around me. The routines didn't disappear. They adjusted slightly to accommodate what was no longer there. At home, my parents continued as they always had. Conversations stayed neutral, practical, focused on things that required no reflection. We did not speak about the wedding. We did not speak about the video. We did not speak about what had been said or what had been seen. There was no denial, but there was no acknowledgement either, just a careful avoidance of anything that might require it. And that, more than anything else, defined what remained between us, not conflict. Absence. Outside of that space, things were different, not dramatically, just clearer. People no longer spoke with the same certainty they had before. There was a pause now, a quiet hesitation when certain topics came close to the surface. No one asked me to explain anything. No one needed me to. The truth had already done what it does best. It existed, without reinforcement, without defense. And over time, that was enough. I didn't try to correct anyone's understanding. I didn't offer details. I didn't revisit the past to reshape it, because nothing about it had changed. Only how it was seen. Sometimes I think about those 10 seconds, not with anger, not even with regret, just recognition. That something so small could hold everything that had been carefully kept out of view, and that once it was seen, it couldn't be placed back where it came from. There is no clear ending to something like this. No resolution that feels complete, just a quiet understanding of what was lost and what was revealed, and the space that remains between those two things unchanged.